are things that I see when I walk into an Agile organization, and if I see some of these things, I start, sometimes I joke that it brings a tear to my eye as a coach, because it starts indicating to me that the teams are gaining maturity, that they're moving down that maturity cycle. They're becoming more and more agile in their behavior, organizationally, in the team, between team members, etc. So these are soft things. I want you to just view them that way. I don't want you to look at them. There's no magic number. There's no order to the patterns. There's no magic order to them. There's no prioritization, and I'm not apologetic about that. They're just things to observe. I do think they're important, and I do think that after the workshop, I hope that you can rethink how you're doing things and what you're doing, and if you can pull out 2 or 3 or 4 sort of next steps or things you can discuss in your next set of retrospectives in your teams, that would warm my heart. That would be a great outcome of this workshop. Okay, so 3 meta patterns: achieving agile maturity. A lot of teams, in my view, there's a false sense of over-maturity. So all I want to do is encourage you to have humility and to realize that agility is very simple. Scrum is simple. Scrum is described in the Scrum Guide in 18 pages or 19 pages. Some people argue that that's too much, but to me, that's a guy that's read and written 300, 400-page books. That's relatively short for a description of Scrum. Most of the Agile methods can be described they're simple things, and I think folks, by looking at them simply, they can get this false sense of over-maturity. That leads into the second thing. The simplicity of the methods is good. I also think it's a weakness of the method sometimes, in that folks can look at it and say, oh, we can get this. We can be doing Scrum effectively in a week or in a sprint. And I would argue that you're never fully Agile. You're never fully Scrum. You should be always continuously improving and always learning. As a coach, I've been doing this for 12, 15 years in extreme programming and Scrum and Kanban. I don't think of myself as having expert level experience. I don't think of myself as having gotten there. I'm on a journey, and I'm learning. I'm continuously learning and observing. And I think sometimes the simplicity of the methods gets in our way. They are simple. But being agile is very much harder, and it's that continuous sort of cycle. And then culture is something that we saw. Version 1 does a survey, and they talk about some of the failure factors in agility, and culture is a large failure factor. So Scrum can be disruptive. Some of the other methods, Kanban, can be less so. All-in versus incremental. What I'm really saying here is very often your culture and how you attack agility is a significant factor in your maturity. So just reevaluate that, and how do you handle commitment, and how do you handle your baseline Scrum or your baseline definitions? How do you steer, and how do you evolve, not as an individual but as an organization? So that really comes into play. So just some thinking models or thinking patterns that I wanted to start with. Another one I just mentioned is this notion of doing Agile versus being Agile. And probably a lot of you have heard this. This is a relatively common analogy out there, where doing Agile is going through the motions, going through tactics, going through ceremonies for Scrum, applying the techniques, versus being Agile is that next step where beyond the techniques you're focusing on mindset, and your leadership team has acquired, or your organization has acquired the mindset, and you're focusing on behaviors, and you're focusing on outcomes and results and things like that. And going back to what I was saying earlier, and you're focusing on, you realize, so in doing Agile, a doing Agile team thinks that just having a stand-up and having sprint planning and having a Scrum Master, that's good enough. We've arrived. A being Agile team realizes in a humble way, they realize that we're good, but there's so much more that we can do. We can continuously get better. And part of this workshop is I find that a lot of teams are having doing Agile behaviors, and I want to sort of encourage you to look for at least being Agile. So moving from doing Agile to being Agile. We're not going to take a poll of what maturity patterns are or anything like that. We're just going to dive into the patterns because we have a lot. I think we have a lot to cover. Brian said it earlier. Brian's going to be monitoring questions. So please, if you have questions along the way, type them into the question box, and Brian will be interrupting me. So we're trying to reserve Q&A for the end, but my preference would be to take questions along the way, and then have have an abrupt ending at the end. So really take the questions. Our preferred model would be to take the questions when they come in, and we'll see how that goes. But I encourage you to ask questions. We have 15 patterns that I want to illustrate. They're in buckets of 3. And we'll just dive into the first bucket. It's technical practices, what I would call technical, but don't look for coding. I'm not going to tell you how to code. So the first what I would call technical pattern is teams start becoming comfortable with truly emergent architecture. They're comfortable with on-the-fly decomposition. A real key is they avoid big design up front, or that notion of beat-up. They might do a sprint 0. I'm not hung up on sprint 0s, not all the time, but I find that a lot of teams are at a crossroads sometimes. If you're at a crossroads, and if diving in and sprinting would be a mistake because you don't know where you're going, it's a new team or a new technology or a new project, and you honestly don't know where you're going, but you want to dive in and start sprinting, then I might argue that if you dive in and start sprinting without knowing what the goal is, without having a clear backlog, well then you might want to pause for a day or two to create a backlog, or your first sprint should be focused on that. I see a lot of teams that are sort of on sprint at a time behavior, so their vision for themselves is only one sprint ahead. They're not looking ahead beyond the current sprint. And I think sometimes they're making a mistake. They're driving up rework, architectural rework, and things like that, and they're not looking ahead quite sufficiently for their domain. Now they're being agile, and there's certainly a lot of action because they're sprinting and they're creating things. But you want to create things that are aligned with your goals and objectives from a project level, from a program level, from an organizational level. Backlogs should contain, I think, research spikes, or you shouldn't be reluctant to write user story spikes, which are stories that say, I don't know. You might get an epic and you may not know how to implement it or even how to estimate it. So to get that information, to figure out, hey, how do we decompose this, you would write a spike that would provide information. You might even do some coding or prototyping to figure things out. So again, you're at that crossroad of, do we dive in and guess and then throw it into a sprint and have it blow up in the sprint because it's, we thought it was an 8-point story and it's an 800-point story, or do we do a little research to make sure it doesn't blow up in the sprint, that we understand it thoroughly? And I would argue, don't be reluctant to do research spikes. Don't be reluctant to show architecture, show refactoring, show infrastructure evolution in your sprint reviews. And have this notion of working in slices, that you work your code, work your architect. Your architect should be thinking of activating their architecture in slices, end-to-end bits that have front to back, UI to back end demonstrability, and really sort of slicing their systems in that way and working with the teams. So instead of having architects that throw things over the wall into the teams and say, here, I've thought deep thoughts, now it's your turn to just implement them. The architects will work more closely with the teams, maybe pair with the teams, dive into the teams part-time and really work with them hand in hand by pairing. So these are some aspects of what I would call truly emergent architecture. You don't have to do all of these, but you want to be looking. I have this term I talk about a lot called look ahead. I want teams to be looking ahead sufficiently so they don't have incredibly high degrees of rework. I don't think redesigning things that you designed inappropriately because you didn't think ahead enough, I don't think that's agile. I think there's a balancing act. Now, I'm not saying do waterfall design and waterfall architecture, which the look ahead there was you were trying to look ahead forever. Don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. So I hope that was valuable. I'll leave it to Brian to interrupt me if there's questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep cruising along, everyone. Like I said, we have a relatively short period of time for 15 patterns. The second pattern is aggressive refactoring, and this is more of a reminder. I think any of you who are working on a greenfield project or a new project, a place where you get to practice agility from scratch, those are easy. I'm not saying the projects are easy, but refactoring and keeping your design whole and keeping your coding practices good are relatively easy in those in sort of those contexts. And so do that, not trivializing it, do that. But when you encounter legacy code, hairy, old, fragile legacy code, I still think in those cases that I want you to refactor. I want you to aggressively look for refactoring opportunities. I want you to identify it as a team. Really importantly, and I find a lot of immature teams don't do this. They'll complain, and I'm not complaining about their complaining, but they'll complain about this really crufty old legacy code. But when I look at their backlogs, I don't see them articulating any stories or any work or making any business cases around fixing that refactoring, about putting it into sprints, about making the case to their product owners. And I really want, part of this pattern is I want teams to look at refactoring and looking code improvement and looking infrastructure development and looking bug fixing in the same way, with the same fervor, with the same passion that they do features. And putting it into the backlogs. And the product owner can't do this. The teams have to do this. Now, the final bullet at the bottom, from my point of view, there's a corollary here where you need to be courageous in your refactoring, and to the degree that you have test automation in order to provide a safety net for your refactoring. So when you're refactoring, always consider, do we have that safety net of automation? If you don't, you may want to write stories around automation, which will then give you this courage or this empowerment to then do more refactoring, because you can verify if you broke anything or not very quickly. So aggressive refactoring, personal ownership within the team, and then the courage to make the case in business terms whenever you can. But don't look for permission. Don't look for your product owner to sort of carve things out and make it really easy for you to do this. I think you have to fight for this. Not in a confrontational way, but in a professional way, in a crafts, with the mindset of a craftsperson, and with the mindset that quality really matters and building things well really matters. The final technical practice, and it sounds maybe trite to some degree, but really ruthless kiss. Keep it simple, stupid, and it's not just a coding activity. I find that too many teams test too much. They code too much. They design too much. They design too far ahead. There's this notion of wanting everything to be complete. They plan too much, believe it or not. And some plan too little, and some test too little as well. But it's getting this balance of ruthless simplicity, of doing it just in time and just right, in small increments. And when you're making these trade-offs, continuously engaging your product owner in those trade-offs. There's a term in the PMI, the Project Management Institute, they talk about gold plating, and you want to fight. Gold plating is building something that, if your customer asks you to build a widget, you build the widget plus plus. You're gold plating it because your heart's in the right place. You're like, oh, they'll eventually need this, this, and this as well. But so you're overbuilding beyond the requirement. And you don't want to do that. You want to take the just enough, in time approach on everything. So code, test, documentation, planning, iterations, activities, meetings. You don't want to have wasteful meetings where everyone has to sit around when two people could meet and make a decision and then talk to the team about it, etc. I find there's so much leanage we can do. We can lean things so much, and I want you to have this in your mindset. And I see in mature teams that they really are aggressively attacking sort of, believe it or not, simplicity, which is incredibly hard to do, because I think our DNA is to complex solutions. At least for me, it's really hard for me to get to the simplest possible thing that can work, and we want to continuously remind ourselves of that. So that's the end of the technical practices. I want to talk about some teaming practices. Number 4, or patterns, behaving like a team. And I know it's every Agile team says we're a team, but I'm looking under the covers. I'm looking to pretend the team is behind glass, and you're observing the team. So you're looking. You can't hear them say we're a team. You're just observing the behaviors. You're observing the results. You're observing what's going on, and that's what I'm looking at here. I personally think that including the Scrum Master and the product owner and the team, they're members of the team. So there's different schools of thought in the Agile community sometimes. Do we invite the product owner to our retrospectives? Can the product owner talk at the daily stand-up? Some folks marginalize them as team members and say we won't invite them to the retrospective, and or they can't really talk at the daily stand-up. And I don't subscribe to that. I'm not even disagreeing with them. I don't look at the world that way. I look at them as being they're part of the Scrum team, not part of the development team. But I want to be inclusive with them. Even if they're dysfunctional, even if the product owner has a dysfunctional attitude and they put too much pressure on the team and cause the team to make mistakes or to compromise quality, well, then I want to handle that dysfunction in the product owner. I want to, I want to look them in the eye and say, hey, you need to stop that behavior with your team. You're doing your team a disservice instead of kicking them off the team. You want to develop trust and have this ability, just like I demonstrated there with congruent feedback, to look the product owner in the eye and tell them the truth. I have this notion of getting the elephants on the table, particularly in your retrospectives. Read my lips, particularly in your retrospectives. You don't want to be talking about the weather in the retrospectives, or, we need to adjust our planning poker cards. We don't like the question mark and the infinity sign. We need to remove those cards from our decks. That may be the case, but I doubt whether that's the most compelling thing that's standing between you and continuous improvement are those two cards and that infamous question mark. You want to get the serious things in play. You want to be honest with each other and open. Another thing I look for in teams, and this happens at the daily stand-up or in planning, is having team members feel comfortable enough to ask for help, to say, I don't know how to do this story, or I'm struggling with this story. I need someone to help me. It's the second priority in our sprint. And I'm really struggling. I know I acted cocky in the beginning, but now I can't figure out how to do it. On the flip side of that, I'm looking for team members to help, to actually offer help in a way that's not that sort of is team-based. I've seen developers begrudgingly offer to help testers test, but their mental state is, I'm doing your job for you, and that's not helping. That's not team. That's not having a team mindset. You're helping the team. You can test if that's the right thing to do with it, and you're not doing their job for them. You're doing your job. You're helping the team out to deliver high quality, high value stories or high quality work. Sometimes it's useful to spend personal time together. I like to influence teams to even just break bread, to have lunch together, or bagels in the morning, or something like that. I think periodically it really helps. One measure of a team is, do you have passionate debate and healthy conflict around things that matter, not around the question mark. That would be a case of something that doesn't matter, but around the things that really, these fundamental issues like design decisions and QA decisions. How do we, how much regression test do we really have to do for this set of stories in this sprint in order to effectively deliver a high quality chunk of work, and have some healthy debate around that. And you want to do that, and all voices count. So you're listening. It's not the two loud voices out of 10 people that matter, but it's all, and all voices get heard, and you aggregate and you respect one another. And then ultimately you succeed or fail as a team. There's no throwing a team under the bus. For example, language. I really detest the language that says, I hear this in Agile teams sometimes, why didn't we find that in test? And it comes from a team. And the implication is that the testers, the function of testing, the testers dropped the ball. And I would argue that the testers didn't drop the ball. I mean, they may have, but the team dropped the ball. The developers could have not written the bug in the first place. Anyone on the team could have found the bug. Anyone on the team could have fixed the bug. The point is, it's not, there's no finger pointing from QA to dev, or from dev to QA, or from QA to BA, or from the Scrum Master to QA, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. It's behave as a team, and you succeed or fail, and you have that in your DNA. It's not just you say it, but your language, your body language, when you're getting up in front and doing the sprint demo, you really aren't throwing people, you're doing it together, and you can see that. Another pattern is truly collaborative work. The picture here is sort of that quintessential Agile space that I've seen for years, which is people sitting at tables, looking at two screens, multiple screens, someone pairing, someone driving, someone observing, pair programming, pair testing, it's that collaboration across the team. You can run, but you can't hide. If someone gets upset or is having a problem, someone else can hear them being frustrated and can walk over and help them because you're right there together. Part of this is avoiding scrummerfall-like behavior. And what I mean by that is, in a 10-day sprint, having the developers work for 8 days and the testers really looking for scraps and not being able to test anything, and then magically on day 8 or 9 of a 10-day sprint, the developer's saying, we've got it all done here, just test it. The hard part is done, just test it. And the testers scrambling and working overtime and nights and maybe getting done or not getting done. And the developers, even worse, the developers move on and say, our work here is done, we're going to move on to the next sprint. So not doing that, but being co-located, truly collaborative work where you pair, where you work together, where you swarm around the work and you have lots of comfortable pairings. But the pairings are not just dev to dev or QA to QA or test to test or BA to BA. There's this notion of a triad where the developer plus the testers plus the product owner get together around working code, and you're qualifying working code and you're giving feedback. The product owner is giving you feedback and you're making real-time adjustments and really being very efficient in how we're sort of narrowing into delivering the value that the product owner wants. And then listening to each other, mutual respect, honoring experience. Collaborative work both in planning, in sitting, in just all of the behavior. So getting to that, to this state, even if you're in offices, simulating this by having space, reserving time in a conference room where the team gets together and the team has team space versus office space, to me would be driving that view that collaborative work matters. It builds better products. It builds better communication. It tightens up the feedback loops is what I'm really saying towards efficiency. So instead of having handoffs, we're working, the handoffs are micro handoffs. It's here, can you take a look at this, give me feedback, as opposed to an email or a check-in request or something like that. I was alluding to this earlier with reducing WIP. I think lean work queues in our thinking really matters. So limiting your work in progress, having fewer things in process. So a team could be working on 10 stories at once or 3 stories at once. Which would be better? From my point of view, a team of 7 to 9 or 10 people, an Agile Scrum team, a quintessential, a standard Scrum team. How much do they work on? I would rather they work on less serial stuff. Instead, I would rather they work on the highest priority set of stories, maybe 3, 4, 5. They work on it together. They swarm. Maybe a few developers are working on the #1 priority with a couple testers. They're trying to get the work done as soon as possible. They're not trying to sort of keep themselves busy, but they're focusing on throughput. They're focusing on doneness. They're focusing on collaboration and getting that small set of things done before they move on to lower priority work. You want to think in terms of lean waste. Waste in this case is the handoffs and the collaborations and waiting for feedback. A developer checks in code, the tester's busy testing someone else's test drop, I'll get to it in 2 days. Well, from a getting that story done perspective, that 2 days is waste. We want to reduce that. We want to make progress. We want to make instantaneous progress. We want as instantaneous feedback as we can, and on a small set of high priority work. That's sort of the goal, and that's a thinking model. I have a client, a current client or a recent client, and they're really struggling with this notion of swarming. And they think in terms of, you're going to make me swarm, Bob, and you're going to put a gun to my head, and every story has to be swarmed. And I guess along the way somehow maybe they got the impression, and nothing could be further from the truth. I'm not looking to make the team do it. I'm looking for them to be opportunistic swarmers. So when they discover stories that are swarmable, they should be all over that and get them done as soon as they can. So no one should be making them. But in their case, they're not opportunistic swarmers. They look at all the work as being serial, and that's what I'm pushing on. It's like, don't look at the work that way. Look at trying to get things, a small set of high priority work done as soon as possible, not comfortably keeping everyone sort of busy for the 10 days of the sprint. Feedback is our friend. That's 6 down. I've got 15, so we've got check. I want to do a quick time check. We're not doing too bad. I want to get into some quality and testing stuff. So a pattern here is, and again, all of these are maturity. And again, you don't just get there. I don't expect to see a team that hits all of the bullets on all of these slides. I'm just trying to get you to think about where are we in your teams, in your team directly, in your teams, in your organization. Where are some of the gaps that this Galen guy is thinking about? Do they have value in our context? And where might we do some inspection, inspect and adapt? That's what I'm looking for. So number 7 is quality on all fronts. I want you to all, I can't hear you, but I want you to all repeat after me. You do not test in quality. Did I hear it? No, I didn't hear it. You don't test in quality, everyone? Okay, cool, thank you. So leave behind that notion that testing is not a quality activity. You build in quality. Any tester on the planet Earth knows that in the recesses of their mind. They know that. Testing is a necessary activity, but we want to bring quality up front and on all fronts. So you want professionalism with the team. You want this notion of doing the right things, and then you want to do things right. The doing the right things is making sure that you're solving the customer's problems from a quality point of view. So proudly building a story and then handing it to a client in the sprint review and never showing it to them, and then having them say, thank you very much, that's really nice, I love your enthusiasm, but it doesn't solve my problem. You have just, you failed, and from a quality, you should have asked. So there's a responsibility of the team to engage the client, to engage the product owner, to engage the customer during the sprint, during that evolution. Are we solving your problems, and are we doing it in the right way? Are the stories implemented properly? Have we tested thoroughly? Are the designs sound? Do we have extensibility? Did we refactor appropriately? If refactoring of legacy, if you were implementing something in a legacy code base, did we not only implement the story, but did we refactor appropriately in order to implement that feature? And that's a team decision. So are you inspecting? Are you having code reviews and test case reviews? And this could be just simple paired reviews. Are you self-policing as a team? Do you hold yourself accountable to your definition of done? And I would hope that you do. One, I hope you have a definition of done, or doneness criteria, and I hope there's some consistency there. There's some maturity there. When push comes to shove, you don't declare a story that's really not done. You look as a team. You look yourself in the eye and you're honest with yourselves. And then you're not producing over quality. Quality has a cost. So it's just enough quality, and I didn't say just barely enough quality. I'm talking about just enough. What's an appropriate level of quality? What's an appropriate level of inspections? What's an appropriate level of feedback? What's an appropriate level of testing? I am including testing in this, but I want that focus on craft and professionalism. Uncle Bob Martin has written some books on the craft of software development, and I would highly recommend that any developers or developer managers listening in, you want to influence your teams to look at Bob Martin's work. What he's trying to do, and I would include that in the art or the craft of testing or the craft of business analysis. We need to start reinforcing the pride in craft and not undermining it. The craft of testing is a wide and deep craft to do it well. It's non-trivial. The craft of development, the craft of usability or UX, the craft of business analysis, the craft of architecture, and then having the professionalism to hold to our standards as appropriate. Hey Brian, I'm going to pause for a second and see, do we have any I just want to see if you're out there too. I'm just testing to see if you're not asleep. So do we have any questions?
No, I'm here. There's no questions so far.
Okay. I'm going to take that as I'm doing a pretty good job. So everyone, I would encourage you to ask questions if you have along the way. That's fine. Thank you, Brian. I was just kidding. I knew you weren't sleeping. So everyone, testing is everyone's job. I want this willingness on the part of the whole team to pitch in for testing. It's not just testing, although I see a lot of scrum or fall in the world. So I think this is a pattern that I hope goes away at some point. And at some point maybe it gets reframed to be work is everyone's job, or delivering value to the customer is everyone's job instead of testing is everyone's job. But in that scrum or fall view, what I want to see is I want to see developers pitching in. If you've waited to the last minute to throw stories over the wall to test or QA, I want to actually see developers pitch in and test themselves. And I don't want to see it begrudging. I don't want the attitude to be, well, damn it, I'll do this, but you owe me something later on. You owe me lunch because I'm doing your job because damn it, you're the tester and I'm not, and you're wasting my time. Check that attitude at the door. I actually want developers to dive into testing with a smile on their face, a spring in their step. I want them to be attacking, and I'm talking about ugly manual test cases that you pull from a repository, and you're doing, ugly manual regression test cases, and you're running them, very rigorously and keeping notes, etc., and keeping metrics. I want it to be that mindset, the same mindset I would have from testers. You want to listen to test estimates as part of the work estimate. You want to respect test estimates. So in planning poker, if the developers say this is a 2-point story, testers say it's a 10-point story, a 20-point story. I don't want the 2-point story to always win because the testers feel defensive. I want exploration. I want respect. I want understanding. I want sort of this level set of the value of testing. I want the team to understand functional and non-functional testing, that the world is not just unit testing and acceptance tests and running a few feature tests, functional tests, and that's it. The world of testing is integration and system-level test and traceability and performance and non-functional test of security and load and performance, etc. Oh my, there's a lot to it, is the point. And testing is everyone's job. I want professional testers on the team, but I want everyone to pitch in. If the team's behavior is somehow, when they did the sprint planning, they underestimated or underplanned the test, well, then everyone pitch in. And then, oh, by the way, in the retrospective, talk about that so that you bite off less the next time and you allocate more time for testing. And maybe spread that across the team. And then active doneness, the last quality-ish thing is, and I alluded to this earlier, as I want teams to have a definition of done. Sometimes I call it doneness criteria. And I have this view where it's 4 levels of criteria or 4 levels of thinking.
Hey
Brian.
Bob. Hey,
yeah.
We had a couple of questions on the last one. Sorry.
Uh-oh. Cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, the first one was how do you overcome resistance from the developers for testing?
Give me the second one, too.
How do you make developers to test with happy smiles on their faces?
It was sort of the same. I was thinking they might be related. I don't know. I was sort of kidding about the happy smiles. I think both of them, I'm going to answer in the same way. I think leadership of your teams need to set the stage. Whoever is coaching your teams and leading your teams. So if you have a VP or director, so the director of test or QA, let's say the VP of director of QA and the VP of development need to be partnered together and to have a like-minded view about this cross-team, cross-functional, self-directed Agile team that we're trying to create kick-butt products in. And they're coaching their teams not from a development point of view and not from a testing point of view, but from a collaborative, we need to work together to get stuff done, and get it out the door. So instead of measuring success by QA or measuring success by development, lines of code versus test cases executed, we measure by throughput. And we're measuring by stories that meet our doneness criteria and go through the entire system. If you look at the world that way, if they influence their teams that way to say, our value proposition is different, our measure of worth is different, our measure of performance is different, it's throughput, it's cross-team collaboration, it's quality. It's quality is all of our jobs. Then I think you get, over time, you'll get smiling faces and you'll start changing the culture. So I don't think this is a bottom-up activity. I think this is now the bottom-up has to listen to their leadership and hold themselves accountable at a grassroots level, but I think it's led. And I'll just leave it at that. I think leadership, and if you don't have what I described it as a leadership perspective, it's going to be very, I guarantee it's going to be very hard to have smiling developers given the way I presented it. They're not. But if leadership is setting a different view, a different vision for what you're trying to do as an organization, and I've done this personally in several organizations, it's not about smiling, it's about changing the way that we're getting stuff done and changing our view. Instead of a silo-based view, it's a team view. And I have seen this change that I'm describing, but it takes time as well, and it takes leadership vision and just good old solid hard work and communication on the part of your leadership team, plus the teams being willing to change themselves as well. Thanks, Brian. Active doneness. So I'm going to just move forward quickly to a table. I like this table, levels up criteria. Just really quickly, I want you to think about, when you're thinking about definition of done, don't just think about, I ran into a team not that long ago, and their definition of done was they had one point. It was, did the product owner sign off on the story? If the product owner accepted the story, they were done. That was it. They had one bullet, if you will. And my head wanted to explode. I'm like, you want so much more than that. I'm not looking for 1,800 pages, but I'm looking for nuance. I'm looking for basic teamwork products. When a developer checks something in, when a tester writes a test case and says that it's ready to execute a manual test case before they automate it, what is that? Do they review it? Do they have a peer review? Do they check it in? Do they run it before they declare it to be valid? Do they verify that it passes and succeeds? Under what conditions? That's the work product professionalism. Then there's user story acceptance tests. Then I think in terms of sprint level doneness. Is the sprint done? Did we meet the sprint goal? Did we meet our quality criteria for the sprints at the end of the sprint? Did we promote? If we said to ourselves that we will promote from a dev environment to a QA environment and demo from QA for every sprint, did we do that because it was part of our definition of done at a sprint level? And then did we do it, if we're making release, if we're aggregating sprint results into releases, quote unquote, well then did we have criteria for the release? Things like coverage and defect density and traceability if you're in a regulated environment and things like that. So I think in terms of depth and breadth as far as release criteria or doneness criteria, and I encourage you all to do the same thing. So don't trivialize them. It's incredibly important because it drives how the team works. This is, an estimate is driven, the size of an estimate is driven from the definition of done. And you need to have a meaty, juicy, multi-level definition of done from my point of view. I have a 50-plus slide presentation just on definition of done on my website. So if anyone is interested in more here, I know I'm skipping over some things, just send me an email and I'll send you a link to that. Product ownership. I want to, so that's contrasted with two views. There's the view that the product owner owns every story in the backlog. They write every story, they write every acceptance test. If they're bad stories, it's their job to fix them up. The team just tells them if they're good or bad, if they're acceptable or not. But the product owner owns the backlog. There's that view. I disagree with that view. I mean, I understand. I'm not saying they don't own it. They don't have ownership or guidance. But I prefer the view where the entire team owns the backlog, or a village owns the backlog, and the product owner is the mayor of the village. So the village doesn't, 100 people don't decide what the traffic laws are. There is some guidance. There is a town group, and there is a mayor. So there is leadership, but the village contributes, and that's sort of the mindset that I want in mature Agile teams who are interacting with backlogs and interacting with product owners. Now, the product owner shares vision and goals and business values and technical direction, oh my, all of that. They need to do that so that the team then can contribute back. But I want the team to have those voices. For example, earlier on I was talking about refactoring and adding refactoring stories or adding improvement stories. Well, who would write that? And I would argue that the team should write that, and they should write the acceptance test because they're technical in focus. Now, should they just shove it in the backlog and hide it from the product owner? No, they have to vet it with the product owner. They have to explain their intentions. They have to explain the business case. They have to, quote unquote, sell it to the product owner. But at the end of the day, the product owner should listen to their team, just like the mayor should listen to the mayor is not hopefully most mayors are not dictators and just deciding to do whatever the heck they want. So I want this shared ownership. That view happens. I see too many Agile teams where the team doesn't feel empowered to even touch the backlog in any way. and they feel like it's just being shoved down their throats. And I'm trying to get away from that. I'm trying to create some shared relationship. Please don't walk away from here and unempower your product owner. I'm not saying they still are the owner. They're still the mayor, but you want to work with them. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying collaborate with them. I want a collaborative view, a shared collaborative view of the product backlog. The product owner, and this is what I'm saying, you can be a team, but it needs a unified decision maker. So there is that one decision maker. I want the product owner to be engaged as a team member. That's why I was pushing earlier on that notion that, oh, the PO is not a member of the team. They don't come to the retrospective. I think that's garbage. I want them to come to the retrospective. If they're dysfunctional, I want the team to then confront them in the retrospective. You know, if they're expecting too much of the team and the team is compromising their quality goals, then I want that conversation to come up in the retrospective. The PO should be an advocate for their team. They should be fighting for their team. They should be proud of their team. They should be walking through the hallways and talking about, you know, they should be sort of strutting for their team. And defending their team against, you know, the perception that, oh, maybe the team's not doing enough. Well, you know, the product owners there, they understand where the challenges are in the team. And then I expect them to engage the customer and stakeholders to make sure that the decisions they're making with their team of the value are there. The teams are a valuable commodity. The PO needs to use it and leverage it well. So we need to make sure as product owners that everything the team is doing has incredibly high value. And then don't be defensive. Verify that. Prove to the team that what they ask, you know, what you asked them to do, they did, and prove that it had value in the stakeholders once you've deployed it. I want this collaboration there. So as team members, I want you to collaborate, set a high bar. You're not just serving the product owner. You're in this together. I want you to look at I'd like you to look. I think mature Agile teams look at their backlog differently. I keep saying this. I've been saying this for a number of years. I've been using this analogy of a tapestry, and I want multiple threads going through backlogs. And I think it's starting to stick, but I still see too many threadbare backlogs. And the primary thread in most backlogs is features. I sometimes call it featureitis, where the backlog is just feature, 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 then next day feature, 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 next day feature, feature, feature. And I'm looking for other things in the backlog, things like, are there stories in there that are tidying up architecture and design? Are there stories in there that are talking about test automation investment and quality investments? Are there stories in there that are attacking technical debt and infrastructure and refactoring? Are there stories in there that are attacking bugs? Are there stories in there that are framed in such a way that are fostering the capacity of the team to be innovative and creative? Are there stories in there that are the order of stories? Does it have a meaningful workflow, and does it deliver value at the end of every sprint and at the end of the release? Does it consider things like deployment, like DevOps, and dependencies, cross-team dependencies, and risk? And the answer very often, so I'm looking for all of those threads. I'm not looking for all of them, but I'm looking for the team to think about those threads and then to sprinkle those effective stories in their backlogs. Because a backlog to me it should be much more than just a stream of functions, a stream of epics, a stream of stories. And then grooming, backlog maintenance, backlog grooming and making it iterative, really tidying up the backlog. I think grooming is one of the most important team collaboration activities that you can participate in your Agile teams. And I find that so many teams, they fight against it, they cancel the meetings, they minimize it. When they do it, they belabor the stories. They might talk about one story in a 1-hour meeting, so it's not facilitated effectively, and they're not being effective, etc. They're not focusing on the grooming. And conversely, the mature teams that really nail grooming, their performance and their vision and their rework, their architectural rework, and their risk mitigation is so much more nuanced and so much more effective. I've talked lately about continuous improvement, elephants out in the open, and really what this slide is saying is retrospectives. I can't tell you how important whole team, private, safe, frequent retrospectives are a place where you can share your challenges and creatively look at ways to attack them, try new things, have new ideas, maybe fail occasionally, but you're trying new things, you're stretching. I can't tell you how important it is from a mature Agile perspective. I see so many retros that either folks schedule in for 10 minutes, they become a coffee meeting, or the teams, because they don't want to, they're avoiding conflict, they talk about things that really don't matter. At the end of the day, with their sprint performance and their team performance, they're avoiding things, they're in denial. And then I see, every once in a while, I see these wonderful teams, and I look at their performance, and I ask them, or I participate, they invite me in, and one of the critical success factors is the quality of their retrospectives and how they keep them fresh and keep them innovative. Usually a tip of the hat to Scrum Masters. The Scrum Master is facilitating this, and so a really big tip of the hat in these cases to the Scrum Masters who keep things fresh and understand the value of the retrospective. So I'm emphasizing, I can't emphasize, and it's not just, please don't just conduct a meeting and say, oh, well, we're doing retrospectives. Maybe have a retrospective with your team periodically of your retrospectives. Do a fist of 5 of your retrospectives and see is the team really, do they really feel like the retrospectives are the retrospectives that you think they are. The power of complete transparency is, what I'm really just saying is tell it the way it is, organizationally. Have the courage to have congruent truth-telling, success or failure in your sprints. Have rampant information radiators. Just expose the truth of what's going on in your teams, and then be prepared for questions. Don't get defensive, and just explain what's going on, and be open to suggestions. But there's this incredible power of transparency. I've done a couple blog posts on my website about transparency if you want a little bit more, and I've written a book called Agile Reflections, and I talk about transparency in it. But transparency rocks. Year over year over year, I reflect back, and I just keep seeing the power of just being open and allowing the organization to engage with the teams and then adjust towards those goals. And then finally, the last pattern is, and I have to be honest, I just like this picture, and I like the notion of stretching. This may be something that folks are uncomfortable with. I'm not suggesting dictatorial stretching or mandatory stretching. In fact, SAFE, one of the things, I didn't mention this in my blog, but SAFE, the Scaled Agile Framework, has the notion for a team, every sprint you have to plan, I think there's an edict where you have to plan stretch items. So you have to plan to stretch when you do sprint planning, and I disagree with that. So I am not aligning this, so please don't align this slide with the SAFE practice. What I'm saying, though, is having this, sometimes I call it this leaning forward attitude where can we do more? Be creative, not simply following the story of the task list, but being creative even in the moment of the sprint. Exploring alternatives with your product owner. The wisdom of crowds. Don't just look at a story and say, oh, it's an 8-point story, and it's always an 8-point story, and we'll implement it at the end of the sprint, it's an 8-point story. Always be looking at, can we do it simpler? Can we do it easier? Can we cut time off of it? Can we cut effort off of it and still solve the problem in a high-quality, high-value way? You want to be thinking as a team of stretching and doing more with less, if you will, all the time. Iterations that lead towards good enough. That should be the mantra, that good enough. Fighting Parkinson's Law. So Parkinson's Law is work filling the planned vacuum. So if you plan an 8-point story, Parkinson's Law would say, darn it, it's going to fill that 8-point story, even if you got it done in 3 points. And I would say if you get it done in 3 points, then deliver it after 3 points. I'm just using points as a silly measure, but now you have extra time, so invest in something else, stretch. And then student syndrome is waiting to the last minute, so procrastination. Put those two together, and you can see those two playing sort of havoc in traditional project planning. We don't want them to play havoc in Agile planning. And the final point on the right is slack time. Give yourself time for innovation and creativity and experimentation. Give yourself a license. Tom DeMarco wrote this wonderful book called Slack, and he defines it quite nicely. Google time or hackathons are ways of are methods of giving the team slack time. And to me, that's part of stretching as well. So the real key here is forget stretch, but doing more than you think is possible. Try. Envision more and see if you can get that. I love that attitude of envisioning more with teams, more with less. I'm done. You can get a copy of the slides here. These slides can be gotten right from this link, or Brian's going to make them available as well on our website with the video. And are there any questions, Brian? We only have we might have 5 minutes left. Questions?
Yeah, there's no current questions, but we definitely welcome them. So please send them in if you have any.
Okay. So what were the most compelling ideas or lessons? What adjustments? The real key, and you don't have to answer the second question for me, but I want you to answer it for yourselves. What adjustments might you try within your Agile teams based on this webinar? And then what ideas, what did I miss? And again, I cut quite a bit. I probably cut this presentation in half for the hour format. So there are some patterns that I intentionally skipped, but I tried to give you the ones that I thought were the juicier patterns. So with that being said, I think we're gonna just wrap this thing up. Brian?
Hey Bob, we got a question in. You talked about Dev helping QA. What about QA helping Dev?
I think it goes both ways. I hope I wasn't, in my illustration, I think I'm too heavy-handed with Dev to QA because of Scrummerfall and seeing that so often in immature teams where, you know, the stuff hits the fan at the end of a sprint. I'm really overreacting to that. It goes always. I want the team. I don't even, at some point, I try to, when I'm coaching teams, I don't want to say Dev or QA or BA or Scrum Master or PO. I want to look at a group of individuals and say, work together, damn it, to get stuff out the door and do what makes sense in your context so that you're not maximizing the silo of development. You're maximizing the flow of high value through the team. That's your prime directive. So figure that out. And that would imply that QA can do what makes sense to maximize the throughput as a team.
Okay, thanks. And then what about should swarming include the product owner and QA?
I don't know. So the product owner role and the Scrum Master role are sort of these exception roles that they may or may not do work. I don't want to, it depends on the context. Classically, the roles are different. But I do think that so forget swarming, the product owner, the notion of a triad, you want to be thinking of a triad where when we're doing work, whether we're swarming or not, it's a developer plus a QA plus a product owner. Ken Pugh coined this term of the triad. And what he's saying is he's not being silo-based, he's being function. He wants a builder and a verification tester and the person remaking the request to work together iteratively, not hand it off from dev to QA to PO for signature, but to work from the beginning, from the instance of the story being created to the point where it's delivered and accepted. Work together. Those three tiers of the stool should be collaborating around that together. I don't know if I would call that swarming. You could. But I would call it triads. I would call it pairing. I would call it sort of high-velocity collaboration.
Looks like that's it.
Cool. You want to close this down, Brian?
Sure, yeah. So thanks, Bob. That was excellent. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Bob or myself if you have any questions you think of later. And, again, we'll make the content available online, and we look forward to seeing everyone at our next event. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take good care.